This is a paid advertisement for Jacoby & Myers Mass Torts Law Group, LLC.
Welcome to our program. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh, and with me today is Richard Kellner in our studio, and Troyce Wolf and Chris Placitella with us from their home offices via Skype. They're all attorneys with Jacoby & Myers Law Firm Network. Today's program is focused on the devastating lung disease caused by asbestos, including mesothelioma, asbestosis, and lung cancer. And we're pleased to have Richard, Troyce, and Chris with us today. All of these attorneys are recognized as leading asbestos mesothelioma trial lawyers. Jacoby & Myers is nationally known for their representation of victims of these devastating illnesses. Now, Richard, Troyce, and Chris, thanks all of you for being with us today. And given the current pandemic, our viewers really have a need for legal advice. Thanks to the magic of today's technology, we're here to provide it together.
Thank you, Dr. Walsh. We're pleased to be here.
Now, the Jacoby & Myers Law Firm Network has a very interesting and impressive history of representing plaintiffs against large corporations and insurance companies. Can you tell us about this history and how your firm has evolved into a major national law firm network?
In 1972, Stephen Myers and Len Jacoby founded Jacoby & Myers, and they founded it on a revolutionary theory. They decided to form a law firm for ordinary people, instead of large corporations and insurance companies. For 48 years, Jacoby & Myers has provided high-quality legal representation and also, and this is important, provided their clients with respect and dignity in their representation. And we're proud of the fact that we have recovered billions of dollars for our clients, but still provided that high-quality and compassionate representation.
And I will also add that during the last 48 years, you've also provided us all with a radio jingle in our head that we will never forget. Now, Jacoby & Myers is nationally known for their efforts in protecting the rights of victims, especially those victims suffering from things like mesothelioma, asbestosis, and lung cancer caused by exposure to asbestos. Can you tell our viewers about your firm's involvement in the representation of victims of these particularly devastating cancers and how it has become really the main focus of your practice?
At Jacoby & Myers Mass Torts, we specialize in the representation of individuals who've been victimized by drug companies and large corporations who put profits ahead of safety. With respect of mesothelioma, this has been particularly egregious because we know that all of these corporations knew about the harmful effects of mesothelioma and still went forward and put their employees at incredible jeopardy. Now, one of the things that we believe in at Jacoby Myers is that we want to have the best attorneys to best represent our clients. We affiliate ourselves with the top trial attorneys. And it's particularly important in mesothelioma because these cases go to trial. In Chris Placitella or Troyce Wolf, these are two of the top trial attorneys who've recovered hundreds of millions of dollars for their clients.
Now, I do know that your firm has a really impressive record in the area that we're talking about today. And maybe Chris and Troyce can give us an example, an overview, if you will, of how asbestos exposure came about and what serious health issues are caused by it. As I understand it, mesothelioma, asbestosis, and lung cancer are all linked to exposure to asbestos. Chris, can you explain how that works?
Well, after the turn of the 20th century, what basically happened was insulation was being used in construction and shipbuilding, and probably by the late 1920s, early 1930s, it became known in the industry that asbestos could cause lung disease. And as time went on, the knowledge increased. Sometime in the 1950s, in the early 1950s, it was recognized that it could cause lung cancer. And by the early 1960s, it was recognized that even low-level exposures could cause a disease known as mesothelioma, which is a cancer of the lining of the lung and the peritoneum that's only caused by asbestos, nothing else. And ultimately what happened is asbestos was intentionally put in some products, and then because it was in the mines and in the environment, it became a contaminant of other products like talc-based products. But that's a quick overview.
Well, it's really interesting that this knowledge has been around for so long. Troyce, can you explain why companies didn't do anything earlier and why they became eventually predatory corporations?
Yeah, a simple answer, corporate greed. Um, Asbestos was extremely cheap. It was a very cheap product, and it worked very well as a binder, and also it had a very high resistance to heat. It was used in a lot of applications where there was high temperature heat, refineries, steel mills, things like that. It was also used a lot in joint compounds as a binder so that the joint compound would crack when it was drying. But the simple answer is it was a very cheap product and it worked very, very well. The corporations, even though they knew this product could cause these deadly diseases, continued to put it out in the market with no warning whatsoever. Corporate greed, simple as that.
That is shocking. We'll be back with more information. Don't go away.
Learning that you or a loved one has been diagnosed with mesothelioma, asbestosis, or lung cancer caused by exposure to asbestos in the workplace is a life-altering experience. If you or a loved one has suffered this devastating diagnosis, Jacoby & Myers Mass Tort Group is the law firm to call for the help you need. For over 47 years, Jacoby & Myers has been on your side. You are not alone. Their team of affiliated law firms focus on the representation of victims suffering from mesothelioma, asbestosis, and lung cancer caused by exposure to asbestos in the workplace, even though many companies were aware of and failed to protect their workers from this dangerous condition. Importantly, there are approximately 60 trust funds with over $30 billion in funding that have been set aside by the manufacturers and some of the companies to potentially provide compensation for these injuries. If you've been diagnosed with mesothelioma, asbestosis, or lung cancer, Jacoby & Myers Mass Tort Group is ready to help. Experience matters. At Jacoby & Myers, they have the resources, experience, and ability to represent victims of mesothelioma, asbestosis, and lung cancer. They are on your side to seek the compensation you deserve while treating you with respect and dignity. You won't pay a thing unless there's a financial recovery in your favor. Call now for a free case review.
Welcome back to our show. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh. With me again is Richard Kellner from Jacoby & Myers. We are talking about mesothelioma. Now, Chris, there are potentially millions of people who have been exposed to asbestos. Are there any specific occupations that you find more frequent exposure?
The exposures are extremely high in construction trades and obviously in asbestos manufacturing plants, shipbuilding, and it extended well into the 1990s and beyond. First, it was in the installation of the products, and later, unfortunately, in the removal of the products. Many times people didn't even know what they were exposed to was asbestos.
And Troyce, I understand there's something called secondary exposure. Can you help me understand what that is?
Sure. I mean, what's sad is there's household exposures, which we typically call, is where a housewife who never set foot, say, in a steel mill or a shipyard, but her husband worked in those facilities. He would bring the asbestos dust home on his clothing, unbeknownst to him. His wife would then launder his clothing, shake it out. She would then breathe the asbestos and would get these deadly diseases just like the workers would.
I can understand that some of these cancers take a long time to manifest and become symptomatic. Your firm is particularly good at making that connection between illness and exposure. How do you do that, Chris?
Well, typically, from the time of exposure till disease is anywhere from 15 to 40 years. Sometimes it's as little as 10 years. And that's the insidious part. You know, asbestos doesn't have any onion properties. You can't taste it. You can't smell it. It doesn't make your eyes water. So you are exposed one day, and sometimes it only takes a couple of days of exposure. And then 15 years later, unfortunately, you are devastated in injury and mortality because of the exposures you had no idea were happening.
You guys are nationally known for being able to make that connection in courtrooms and winning over verdicts. How are you able to do that?
We all bring in experts, and the experts talk about the scientific literature that's been around forever. There's no question that asbestos causes all of these deadly diseases. And it's been known and it's been published in the medical literature for decades, starting all the way back in the 30s and 40s. And so in the courtroom, we do have some of the best experts in the world, medical doctors, industrial hygienists, and they come in and talk about this and give their opinions as to why our client who is exposed to asbestos, typically in a workplace, that exposure is the cause of his mesothelioma, a disease that will take his life.
And Richard, maybe you can tell me how big this problem really is. Like, how many cases a year are we talking?
There are literally thousands of cases that manifest every year, and there still is, by the way, a fund that has, I think, about $30 or $40 billion left to compensate, because a lot of these companies either went bankrupt or created a fund to pay for victims. And every year, unfortunately, more and more people die.
So it's good to know that there actually is some victim compensation out there, especially for families of those victims who have passed away.
Absolutely. And even if a company's gone bankrupt, there are actually ways to get some money for the families. And you have to understand, this is such a devastating disease. And we're talking about absolute 100% certainty that people will die.
So we've talked about that from time of exposure to asbestos until the onset of cancer can be sometimes decades. But what are the symptoms? Chris, could you talk a little bit about what the early symptoms are for victims?
Well, with cancer, it could start as shortness of breath, sometimes simple pain in the back, in the abdomen, very similar to what you would get from a smoking-related lung cancer. And as time goes on, the symptoms become more severe. The loss of breath becomes more severe. If there's swelling in the abdomen, if it's peritoneal mesothelioma. But the early signs are pain, shortness of breath. And this is why we tell people, if you believe you have been exposed to asbestos, it's extremely important from a public health perspective to tell your doctor that. Not because you're necessarily sick, but the doctor will know to ask the right questions, look for the right signs, take x-rays where maybe they would not normally take x-rays. So from a public health perspective, if you believe you've been exposed to asbestos, please tell your doctor, so your doctor has all the tools and equipment that he or she needs in order to preserve and look after your health.
And let's talk more specifically about that process of diagnosis. What does diagnosis entail? What kinds of tests?
Well, it could typically start with an X-ray, CAT scan. As they progress in the diagnostic regimen, they have biopsies and beyond that. But there's usually kind of a scale they go through. They'll start with an X-ray, go to a CAT scan, then probably a biopsy to be confirmed on pathology.
Now, I understand that there are different types of cancers associated with mesothelioma. Can you help me understand which ones?
Mesothelioma is really a cancer of the lining of the organ. If you would go into, say, a butcher shop, and you would see like that glistening membrane on something that you would buy. That glistening membrane, that's what the mesothelial lining looks like. It's a very thin membrane, and the purpose of it is to stop the friction that would occur between your organ and another organ or the rib cage. So what happens is the asbestos either gets into the lymphatic system or travels through the the esophageal and through the bronchioles and ends up in the lung or in the peritoneum. And there it's deposited and it sits there for decades, and creating changes within the immune system. Ultimately, what ends up happening is the cumulative dose ends up igniting the disease and the cascade of events that happens thereafter.
Troyce, I know that you've won some really big cases on behalf of victims, and some of them were smokers. I know some of the people watching today are thinking, oh, well, my symptoms are probably related to smoking. So, Troyce, can you tell me a little bit about how smokers are impacted by asbestos?
Sure. As far as mesothelioma is concerned, smoking has no bearing whatsoever. Mesothelioma of the pleura is on the outside. It's a tumor or cancer on the outside of the lung. So cigarette smoking has no bearing whatsoever and in no way causes mesothelioma. As far as lung cancer, smoking and asbestos exposure combined greatly increase the risk of lung cancer. So if you have a person who smokes, who also works in an industry and is being occupationally exposed to asbestos, you don't just add the two carcinogens, because asbestos is a complete carcinogen, just like tobacco smoke is a complete carcinogen. You would think you would just add those as far as increasing the risk, but that's not the case. The science is you multiply. And so there's this synergistic effect. And so if you have a smoker who's also being occupationally exposed to asbestos, he has a much, much higher risk of getting lung cancer. So smoking is critical as far as lung cancer combined with asbestos, but smoking plays no role in causing mesothelioma.
Chris, talk to me about the treatment options for mesothelioma.
Well, it used to be that even 10 years ago, if you were diagnosed with mesothelioma, your outlook was very grim. And over the last 10 years, the treatments have gotten a lot better. If they catch the disease early, they have a process where they actually remove the tumor, and there's obviously chemotherapies, and they're making progress all the time. And things are much better now, and there's much greater reason for optimism. And frankly, the greatest medicine, I always tell my clients, the greatest medicine that you can have is optimism and hope. And, now there's time and a place for hope where even 10 years ago, there was not. You can extend life. But I think one of the messages here clearly is, and I said it before, if you know you were exposed, your doctor needs to know that. Because if you come in with symptoms that might not otherwise trigger a concern, if the doctor knows, hey, you've been exposed to asbestos, early intervention is much more likely.
You're right that treatments have improved enormously and prognosis has been extended. I'm sure people, when they seek compensation, can also get access to better medical care because then they can afford it.
Fortunately, people who have been exposed at work a lot of times have medical care through workers' compensation, or at this point, at least in the United States, people can get the medical treatment that they need. But early intervention here is the key. There's no guarantee that it will cure you, but it can give you good quality extension of life. So early treatment, early diagnosis, extremely important.
These corporations, so predatory. People really need to hear this information. Stay with us. We'll be back with more after this.
Learning that you or a loved one has been diagnosed with mesothelioma, asbestosis, or lung cancer caused by exposure to asbestos in the workplace is a life-altering experience. If you or a loved one has suffered this devastating diagnosis, Jacoby & Myers Mass Tort Group is the law firm to call for the help you need. For over 47 years, Jacoby & Myers has been on your side. You are not alone. Their team of affiliated law firms focus on the representation of victims suffering from mesothelioma, asbestosis, and lung cancer caused by exposure to asbestos in the workplace, even though many companies were aware of and failed to protect their workers from this dangerous condition. Importantly, there are approximately 60 trust funds with over $30 billion in funding that have been set aside by the manufacturers and some of the companies to potentially provide compensation for these injuries. If you've been diagnosed with mesothelioma, asbestosis, or lung cancer, Jacoby & Myers Mass Tort Group is ready to help. Experience matters. At Jacoby & Myers, they have the resources, experience, and ability to represent victims of mesothelioma, asbestosis, and lung cancer. They are on your side to seek the compensation you deserve while treating you with respect and dignity. You won't pay a thing unless there's a financial recovery in your favor. Call now for a free case review.
Welcome back to our show. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh. We are talking about people's legal rights when it comes to asbestos exposure. Now, Richard, if our viewers here have been exposed or believe they've been exposed to asbestos and are suffering from mesothelioma or asbestosis or lung cancer, tell me the legal remedies that they may have.
Well, the first thing, as I think Chris mentioned, is they've got to get diagnosed, because that's the first step to be sure that what they're suffering from is a result of asbestos. But once that happens, the clock runs quickly. So the first thing you have to be careful about is that a lot of different states have statute of limitation. So there's a time clock within which you have to file your case. So the first thing is to actually get an attorney, because that is something that can end a case. So theoretically, you could be victimized by asbestos. You could have all of the symptoms and causation, but you filed too late. And when you file too late, you may have no rights. So that's the first step. The second step, and I have to tell you, this is something which is the hallmark of what we're proud of, is you've got to pick the right attorney. Because as you can tell, this is a very science-driven litigation, and also the companies that you are suing have endless resources. So you want to have a trial attorney who has experience. And when I say trial attorney, I mean somebody who's tried these cases, who has a reputation of winning. And then the final thing, and this is something which people don't even think about, is have an attorney you can work with. Somebody who you can trust, who's not there just for the dollar, but actually cares about your case. Because this is the most important thing in your life, and the attorney should feel the same way.
Yeah, your relationship as a client is with a protector.
I've always said the client is the boss. And if an attorney can't recognize it, I don't think they have the business representing that client. It's that critical in my mind.
Now, I've always wondered about this. What if somebody's spouse has passed away from mesothelioma? Do they still have a case?
They do. But again, the critical thing is that statute of limitations. This is a battle. I mean, it's not a friendly thing. This is something where you're going to have another side that's going to fight you with $1,000 an hour attorneys who have only one objective, and that is to beat you. And that's the world.
Right. How long in general does it take to settle a mesothelioma case?
So, again, part of this really comes down to who the attorneys are. If you have an attorney who has no experience doing this, the defense attorneys are going to see how far those law firms will go. Do they have the experience? Do they have the resources? Because you're talking about hiring experts. You're talking about a real long, complicated thing. So the first question is, who are you against? If you're against a very solid law firm, some defendants will say, listen, this is somebody who I know can do X, Y, and Z. If the medical information lines up, you can get a resolution quicker. If it doesn't, then you have the fight.
You know, you mentioned it's all about getting the right attorney. I would think if there are attorneys sitting on the other side of the table from attorneys from Jacoby & Myers, they know your track record. They know you win. They know you've got scientists on board, an army of them. Would that make them speed things up and say, we're done, let's settle?
I think that's human nature. And there's no guarantee, but it helps. And also not only settle, but settle for a fair compensation. You know, somebody who has not tried these cases would say, hey, it's a $2 million settlement. I'm going to take it. whereas an attorney with experience will know what the actual value is.
Tell our viewers a little bit about the key strengths that make Jacoby & Myers stand out amongst other law firms, especially when it comes to mesothelioma, asbestosis, and lung cancer representation.
So I'll give you a couple things. The first part, which is we've been doing this for 48 years. I think you talked about the motto, which was from Len Jacoby, that we're on your side. That's how we look at the world. We also affiliate ourselves with the top lawyers. And there's no ego involved. You know, I've recovered $1 billion in cases, but I would sooner go to Chris or Troyce to handle the cases. Why? Because they're the best, and we want to give them the best. So we look towards the clients to be sure that we find the best attorneys that are out there. There are certain attorneys who talk the talk, and there are others who walk the walk. And you can tell by Chris and Troyce, these guys know what they're doing, they're committed to going to trial if they have to, and they also know how to handle the clients and the other side. And that's all it's about. It's to give the best opportunity for our clients.
Troyce, could you give me an example of a family that you've been able to serve and help through your practice?
Well, there's lots of them. The one stands out in my mind. It was a man with mesothelioma, and I met with him before his deposition. He didn't have much longer to live, and he said, Troyce, I'm going to be here much longer, but my wife and my daughters will be. Will you promise to bring me justice? And I said, I'll do everything in my power to do that. And we tried his case. We got a large verdict, and he survived to see his day in court. His wife then, several months later, wrote me, and I had written him a note just telling him how much I appreciated him being so brave to take the witness stand. He was in pain, and he fought it. He gave his testimony in court, helped us win the case. He took the note that I had given him to his hospital room, and he knew that he was going to die in that hospital room, and he put the note on his nightstand next to the bed where he died. That you don't forget. So I take my cases very personally. I try to represent my clients as if they were my father or my mother. And that may sound cliche, but it's true. These people are dying from horrible diseases through no fault of their own. They were just hardworking people trying to make a living for their family, and they've had the worst injustice slapped on them that anyone could imagine. And so I take my job extremely seriously about bringing them justice as best I can.
It's so commendable, the good work that all you gentlemen do. So the information that all of you, Richard, Chris, and Troyce, have provided today will be so helpful to any of our viewers or their loved ones who may have been diagnosed with mesothelioma or asbestosis or lung cancer. I want to thank all three of you for being here today. I think your work has great meaning in our society, and I hope you continue to help the families that you've been helping.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walsh.
And for those of you watching our show today, thank you very much for joining us. I'm Dr. Wendy Walsh.
This is a paid advertisement for Jacoby & Myers Mass Torts Law Group, LLC.